Samuel. We are in chapter 17, and David has defeated Goliath. I'd like you to remember this for your test, that when facing Goliath, David used weapons he had proven. We want you to remember that he had proven the weapon that he used. He didn't use Saul's armor. He didn't use Saul's sword, but he used the sling and the stones, his slingshot that he had proven. So he used his 5 smooth stones out of the brook and put them in the shepherd's bag which he had, even a scrip, and his sling was in his hand. He used his sling. I correct myself, excuse me. Don't want to lead anybody astray. Okay, with that said, we're picking up in verse 54. And David took the head of the Philistine and brought it to Jerusalem, but he put his armor in his tent.
It shows he really knew how to get ahead, right?
Yeah.
If you can imagine that, he's not just some wimpy little guy, you understand. Not only does he take his head off, he carries that thing. And note this, he took it back to Jerusalem, and he took the armor. Do you understand he had to take the armor off of Goliath?
Yeah.
Remember what the armor weighed?
Yeah.
And he carries it back and he puts it in his tent.
That armor weighed 156 pounds and 4 ounces, and then it weighed another 18 pounds and 6. It was heavy. It was very heavy. And verse 55, and when Saul saw David go forth against the Philistine, he said unto Abner, the captain of the host, Abner, whose son is this youth? And Abner said, As thy soul liveth, O king, I cannot tell.
This is an interesting question and an interesting statement. Because if you remember earlier, Saul... what am I hearing? Is that...
It's no, sir. It's being taken care of. It's a cell phone. It's not yours.
I thought it was me. Okay. Now getting back to what we started. Saul had a problem with the evil spirit, remember? And they had some of his men had said, you need to find someone to play music for you when the evil spirit comes on you, that they can play and sort of get you calmed down, okay? And so someone had suggested getting David. They knew someone. And so David had been the one who had played for Saul after the Spirit of God left him. And he, it appears that he went back and forth from Saul to his father. And then he evidently did not have a very close relationship with Saul. In other words, he's a musician playing for him, but evidently Saul did not personally know him, nor did Abner, who was the general of his army, because when Saul said, "Who is this guy?" Abner said, "I don't know." Isn't that amazing? He had been responsible for keeping him calm, but yet they don't know who he is.
And the king said, Inquire thou whose son the stripling is. And as David returned from the slaughter of the Philistine, Abner took him and brought him before Saul with the head of the Philistine in his hand.
So Saul said, find out who this young man's family is. Now, remember this. Why is that important? Because whoever killed Goliath, their family was supposed to be tax exempt.
That's right.
Right?
Yes.
And get the king's daughter. Okay. And so when Saul says, whose family is this? I mean, find out who this boy is. Find out who his father is. Okay?
And Saul said to him, Whose son art thou, thou young man? And David answered, I am the son of thy servant Jesse the Bethlehemite.
So after David returned from killing Goliath, Abner met him and took him to Saul. Now note this, when he took him to Saul, David was carrying the head of Goliath. And so Saul asked him, who's your father? And he told him that his father was Jesse and that he was from Bethlehem. He's a Bethlehemite, okay?
And it came to pass, when he had made an end of speaking unto Saul, that the soul of Jonathan was knit with the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul.
So Jonathan, being the son of Saul, he's seen what David done. Jonathan's in the army, right, in Saul's army. And when he sees the courage, if you will, of David, and not only the courage, but the success of taking this giant down and then bringing about, as a result of this, bringing about a huge defeat for the Philistines, Jonathan just locked into him. Man, I like this guy. You understand? And so it says that he loved him like he loved himself. So that would be what we would call here a divine connection. Mm-hmm. Jonathan and David just really hit it off. And you'll find out that because of this connection, they enter into a covenant. Mm-hmm. And because of that connection and covenant, Jonathan actually spares David's life. Because David has an inside informant that can let him know what's going on.
And Saul took him that day and would let him go no more home to his father's house.
So from that time, after killing Goliath, Saul enlisted him as a full-time soldier in his army. Mm-hmm.
Then Jonathan and David made a covenant because he loved him as his own soul.
Now note this, it was love that initiated this covenant, okay? And a covenant is not an agreement, a covenant is not a contract. It carries much more depth than that, which here in the Western culture we have a hard time understanding or comprehending actually what a covenant really is. But a covenant is really life for life. And it's basically when you enter into covenant with someone, if you have something they need, then they have the right to request that. Or if they have something you need, you have the right to request that. It's a reciprocal thing. It's not one-sided. Now, here's the interesting thing about this. Jonathan, being the son of the king, would be a prince, right? Mm-hmm. And so it appears that Jonathan is the one who actually initiated entering in to this covenant, which is interesting. He's a prince, and David has just come from the sheep field, you understand? I mean, from the pastures, keeping sheep, and has come down to check on his brothers, you know, and disdained by his brothers. And yet Jonathan sees something in him that he locks into. And so not only does he initiate the covenant, but look at what he does. As a prince, I mean, royalty would dress a little bit different, wouldn't you think? Mm-hmm. So first off, Jonathan takes off his robe and gives it to David. Then he takes off his armor and gives it to David. then he gives him his weapons, his sword and his bow, and the belt, that would hold up the sheath with the sword and all that. So he's stripping himself of recognition and of protection when you think about it. When he enters into this covenant with David, that, my friend, requires trust. You've got to love someone to do what Jonathan did. And let me interject this. You have to in this day and time when you have all these stupid perverts running loose. This is a genuine heart love. There's nothing perverted about it. And so don't even go there with me, okay? This is the love of God one has for another, okay? And it's pure.
We talked about this afternoon, and one of the things that Pete brought out that stood out to me was that Jonathan giving his weapons and his royal robes was an act of submission. And yet think about just the entering into a covenant, submitting to one another with the love of God. First off, how beautiful that is and what it can produce. It's really quite amazing.
Yeah, especially when, we see the end of the story.
Yes.
But especially when you know that David has already been anointed to be king. Pretty amazing, isn't it?
Yes.
Jonathan was legally in line to be the next king. And so what he is submitting is his position. And later on he says that. You'll be the king, and then I'll be next to you. Do you understand? I mean, you're talking about a heart willing to give up being the number one man in the country to allowing his friend to be the number one man. So this covenant had a lot of depth to it, really.
Verse 5, and David went out whithersoever Saul sent him, and behaved himself wisely. And Saul set him over the men of war, and he was accepted in the sight of all the people, and also in the sight of Saul's servants.
So, Saul at this particular time, he's elated that the Goliath, the giant, has been defeated and resulted in the defeat of the Philistine army at this particular time anyway. And so he puts David over these other soldiers. Now, that doesn't mean that he took the place of Abner. Abner was the general of the army. But David is the one that's leading these guys out into combat, if you will. And he behaved himself wisely. That tells me he didn't get lifted up in pride because of what he done. I did something you didn't do, you bunch of security cats and all of that. That's not his attitude at all. He just took care of business, you understand. And so he behaved himself wisely. And not only that, the people, the other soldiers, and the people, they accepted him, man. They looked up to this guy. And I believe that you'll find that they looked up to him because obviously of the feat that he accomplished, but also the attitude with which he did it and the attitude after it was accomplished.
It's amazing the impact of attitude on those around us, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And David's attitude and how he conducted himself in the midst of adverse circumstances. And we're going to keep reading here and find out even when Saul is trying to kill him, the attitude that David kept. Have you ever been around somebody with a sour attitude? How that can impact you in a negative way? Y'all, that's a good lesson to us, isn't it? We have control over our attitudes, don't we? David had control over his attitude. But I can't help but remember how we learned that the Spirit of the Lord was on David, right? Well, we talked about this last session, but it bears repeating. The Spirit of the Lord is in us. We have such an advantage. Verse 6, and it came to pass as they came, when David was returned from the slaughter of the Philistine, that the women came out of all the cities of Israel, singing and dancing to meet King Saul with tabrets, with joy, and with instruments of music. And the women answered one another as they played and said, Saul hath slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s.
Now, when you look at this, it'll let you know that killing Goliath, that just didn't happen. That wasn't just a one-day thing. The battle, he kills Goliath, the army flees, then they engage in battle. We don't know how long, but we know Saul put David over the men of war. And so David going in and out, behaving himself wisely. So there was evidently a lot of other skirmishes along the way, you understand, other battles, maybe of not the magnitude of the first one that he saw, but nevertheless, there's things going on. And so then when the army has accomplished whatever they decided and felt like they had defeated the Philistines, then they go back to Jerusalem and or go back into their own country and all. And the Israeli women, they come out of the cities, the various cities, as they're returning back, and they have their musical instruments. I mean, this is a joyful time. We just won a war. Our enemy's just been put underfoot. So they're dancing and they're singing. But boy, listen to the song. Yeah. Now, Saul slain his thousands, but David his 10,000s. Well, that doesn't sit well with Saul.
No. And Saul was very wroth, and the saying displeased him. And he said, They have ascribed unto David 10,000s, and to me they have ascribed but thousands. And what can he have more but the kingdom?
Okay, let me make sure that I said something there. I tried to correct it, but let me make sure that you know the correction. They did not own Jerusalem at this time. David is actually the one that took Jerusalem, so they're not returning to Jerusalem, okay? It's just it was a slip of tongue on my part, okay? But when Saul hears this, then Saul becomes jealous.
Yes.
And then he becomes angry. And then the reality, I think, sets in. I know who my replacement is. Remember, Samuel has told him, God's taken the kingdom away from you. And he's going to put someone in there better than you. And so Saul's eyeing David now. What more can he have but the kingdom? You understand? And so from that day forward, he is afraid of David because I think he knows at gut level that David's the king that God has selected.
And Saul eyed David from that day forward, and it came to pass on the morrow that the evil spirit from God came upon Saul, and he prophesied in the midst of the house. And David played with his hand, as at other times, and there was a javelin in Saul's hand.
How about that? Now, this will show you something about David. Even though he's been the mighty warrior and all that, the next day after this has occurred, this distressing spirit comes upon Saul. What is all this about? I think it's the fact of he knows the Spirit of God's left him, and he knows that his days are numbered as king of Israel, and it will not be passed down to his next generation. He knows that. Mm-hmm. And so evidently that there's times that he gets very depressed, distraught because of this. And immediately after this, it says the next day, he's in his house. The spirit, this distressing spirit comes at him. What does David do? The mighty warrior takes his harp and playing for Saul. But this time, Saul has a spear in his hand, and as David plays, Saul tries to kill him. Mm-hmm. You understand, he wasn't throwing a spear to kill him. I mean, to scare him. He's throwing the spear to try to take him out. He's attempting to kill David at this particular time. Okay? So it appears from the way this reads that Saul made 2 unsuccessful attempts to kill David. Mm-hmm. And David escaped from that. Okay.
I'm going to read that verse 11. And Saul cast the javelin, for he said, I will smite David even to the wall with it. And David avoided out of his presence twice. And Saul was afraid of David because the Lord was with him and was departed from Saul.
So Saul became even more afraid of David because he recognized that the Lord was with him, and he also recognized that the Spirit of the Lord had departed from him. You know, we were talking earlier today, people know when the Spirit of God's on you, and if their heart's not right, they're uncomfortable around you. And they can even, make defamatory remarks or try to slander you and all this type thing because they know that the Spirit of truth will tell on them. You understand? Mm-hmm. I'll just tell you something that happened to me when I was a heathen teaching Sunday school. You got that right?
Yes.
I knew that my heart wasn't right with God, okay? But because of situation, I didn't volunteer for it. I sort of got pushed into it, and I wasn't going to tell them that I was a sinner. Because I was trying to present myself to be acceptable with the other saints. Nevertheless, I was afraid to go by the pastor when the church dismissed because I was afraid God was going to tell on me. Read my mail, you understand? And so the church had a basement, so I would go out the basement door to avoid going by the pastor. That pastor had never done anything wrong to me. He was just as nice to me as he could be. But he was a representative of God, and I was guilty of sin. You understand? And he took that the wrong way. And anyway, he thought I had something personal against him, and ultimately I just got out of church. You know, a sinner in church is miserable. You understand? You nobody's having to tell you you're wrong. Your heart's condemning you, and yet you're trying to put up this facade in front of everybody else so they don't know that you're not doing stuff you shouldn't be doing, okay? And it wasn't until years later I got my heart right with God. I got born again, okay? And this man had actually moved out of state and was pastoring another church, and someone died, and he was asked to do the funeral, so he came back and do the funeral, and the Spirit of God started dealing with me that I owed him an apology. And boy, I had to suck it up, you understand? And so after he had done the service and people had sort of dispersed and before he got to his car, I walked up to him and I said, may I speak with you for a few minutes? And he didn't know how to take that, but he said, yeah, okay. So I told him, I said, I owe you an apology, and I want to explain something to you. And I went through the whole gamut. I mean, I said I wasn't living right, and I would go out the basement because I was so convicted that I was afraid that if I walked by you, that the Lord was going to reveal my sin, and all that. And, of course, that thing got healed right there in the cemetery of all places. You understand? But you'd be surprised how much of that goes on all the time, okay? And so people get in the presence of a godly person and they get uncomfortable. I didn't want to be around people that was filled with the Spirit of God. Now, people that didn't believe in the baptism of the Holy Spirit, I'm fine with them because they're not going to know the difference anyway, But when a person's filled with the Spirit of God, then that's a whole different story. I mean, God just may move on him by the Spirit and read my mail, you understand? And so I said all that to say, when people get around you, if you're full of the Spirit of God, don't you take it personally. If their heart is not right with God, their own heart will condemn them. My heart condemned me so badly that I would take an exit to where I wouldn't have to go by the people that I thought, might find out that I wasn't just like I was supposed to be, okay? You with me? Mm-hmm. And so the way I look at it today, if your heart's not right with God, I don't want you to be comfortable around me. I want God to deal with your heart so you get your heart right with God. You understand? And it has nothing to do with me. I'm not going to condemn you. I'm not your judge. You're not going to stand before me. But I am the one that could help you. And all you'd have to do is just open your heart and let's get this thing taken care of right now. You understand? And so don't think that you're the culprit per se when the Spirit of God in you is making someone else uncomfortable. Okay? Pray for them. Just pray for them. Realize there's something here. You don't need to, it's none of your business what their sin is. Right. That's not the issue. The issue is you pray for them, God open their eyes to where they're comfortable around the Spirit of God. I've seen many people over the years, when the Spirit of God starts moving in the service, they immediately get up and leave because they're not comfortable with the Holy Spirit. And I know what it's like. I used to be one of them. Man, don't call me out. You understand? So the best way not to get called out is to get out. Right? Okay. Just understand how all that works. The guilty is convicted when he gets around the guiltless. And there's one of two things. He either leaves or he attacks. You understand? Some left Jesus, some attacked Jesus. Okay? Just remember, it's the God in you that they're having a problem with. Okay? You understand all that? All right, now you know I was a rascal, okay? God's forgiven me. My slate's clean.
Amen. Therefore Saul removed him from him and made him his captain over 1,000, and he went out and came in before the people.
So now this got my attention. Saul had placed him over all of his army, and so he was evidently closer to Saul, sort of like, the various people over the various armies than they, or over the various military divisions They can meet with the president, you understand. And so it appears that Saul it sounds like he's demoted. So he moves him out, and now he puts him as captain over 1,000. Okay? That's just from my perspective of the way things work today in military anyway. All right? But it seems like a demotion.
And David behaved himself wisely in all his ways, and the Lord was with him.
So David, he's not taking that thing personal. It doesn't matter what position he's in, he's conducting himself properly. Why is that? Because the Spirit of God's on him. Mm-hmm. His heart's right, like it should be, even though they're not born again under the old covenant. But he was a man that was pursuing the heart of God. He wanted to do things God's way. And so he doesn't, we don't see that he gets upset with Saul putting him in a different position. It didn't matter what position he was in, he behaved himself wisely, whether he's playing a harp, whether he's over the armies, or whether he's a captain of 1,000. He's behaving himself wisely, which tells me that he's operating with the wisdom of God in knowing how to walk in and out among the people. And I'm telling you, that is extremely important. And from the very beginning, reading, this is what Solomon asked the Lord for. I need wisdom and understanding to know how to walk in and out among the people. I realized as soon as I went into ministry, I needed wisdom and understanding just to know how to walk in and out among the people. Because you can be misunderstood easily. You have to know how to conduct yourself. You're supposed to be the example. And so you're being critiqued all the time. Mm-hmm. As the old saying goes, you live in a fishbowl, okay? And so they're watching you all the time. And so you better operate with the wisdom of God in how do I conduct myself. Lord, set a watch at my mouth. Keep the door of my lips. I don't want to say anything that brings a reproach against you. And so I need to know what to say. I need to know when to say it, and I need to know how to say it. You understand? So that you're not a poor representation before God. And I believe David, spent time with the Lord to know how to walk in and out among the people, and he's behaving wisely.
Wherefore, when Saul saw that he behaved himself very wisely, he was afraid of him.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
The more upright you walk, the more fearful they are of you. Pretty amazing. I had a lady to tell me many years ago. She came to church one Sunday. I mean, she wasn't a regular person to church attend. She just came in one Sunday, and after the service, she talked to me, and she said, I believe when you go to church, when you leave, you ought to either feel good or bad. And I thought, I got to think about this. She said, if you're living right, then you ought to feel good about it. And if you're not living right, you ought to be convicted about it. I thought, that's a pretty good statement she made. But it just didn't register. It sounded paradoxical to me. You ought to feel good or bad, one or the other, and how do you feel good or bad? Well, you're right with God, you feel good. You're not right with God, you feel bad because of conviction. But it's an easy adjustment, get right with God.
Yeah.
And then you feel good, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But all Israel and Judah loved David because he went out and came in before them.
It's amazing. The leader hates him, the people love him. Mm-hmm. Why is that? Because the leader's jealous. It's interesting to me how when people get promoted, whether it's in secular work or whether it's in church or whatever, God uses someone and another person's been in the church longer, how people who say they love God get jealous of God putting people in position. You understand? Or God using people.
Mm-hmm.
What's the problem there? There's something wrong with the heart. You understand? Mm-hmm. And I want people to have such a relationship with the Lord that you're comfortable in who you are in the Lord, and you're comfortable in whatever position you may be in at that particular time with the Lord. And when God blesses someone, rejoice with them. Be happy. They're part of your body.
Right.
You understand? We're members one of another. And so we ought to rejoice. And it says if they're hurting, then we need to feel their pain. We need to weep with them. But I find that people will cry with you before they'll rejoice with you. You know, they don't care if you're hurting, but you let God use them and promote them, and then people get jealous. Amazing, isn't it? Time's up. I'm going to have to stop here. So we'll let Heather pick back up with this after the break, okay?
Sounds good.